Welcome to another edition of Daily Airline News, focusing on the loss of Air India Flight 171. I'm Geoffrey Thomas, and I'm delighted to say joined once again by my co-host Richard Godfrey in Frankfurt. Good morning to you, Richard.
And good afternoon to you, Geoffrey.
It is a good afternoon here today in Albany, Western Australia, right out on the south coast. So a different locale. So viewers, today's episode is Rat Sequence, episode 218. Before we get into today's episode, we'd like to give you the results of a test we have been running. Viewers are concerned that their comments are being deleted. We ran a test asking viewers to comment with the word test and at the same time send Richard an email with your YouTube handle and username. 166 viewers participated in the test, and here are the results. Richard.
Yeah, so the question was, are viewers' comments being deleted? And the short answer is yes. Around 5% of the comments are being deleted by YouTube. There were a couple deleted by us. But over the 6.3 million views we've had on the channel so far, we have only deleted 0.008%, which is relatively small. And out of the 166 participants, 8 viewers did the test twice. So they wanted to make sure they were getting through. And 5 viewers tried to disrupt the test. They, instead of writing an email or making a comment test, they said, "This is not a test," or "You are testing my patience." So ignoring repeats and disruptions, that left 153 unique valid responses. And 145, we were able to, that's 95%, able to tie up a comment with an email. And there were 8 that's 5%, that didn't get through for some unknown reason to YouTube. One was held for approval, and we subsequently approved it. But if a comment is held and the approval button is grayed out, that means we cannot override the YouTube block. And even an innocuous comment can be held if it came from someone who's previously violated YouTube guidelines. YouTube doesn't hold people forever, but if you have offended 2 or 3 times, you might get blocked for 90 days. And YouTube has a set of guidelines and policies which it publishes, 22 community policies and 14 advertising policies. And obviously, they don't like inappropriate language or violence or adult content or shocking content, harmful acts, hateful and derogatory content. They don't like people promoting drugs and alcohol and smoking or firearms and weapons. And you need to avoid controversial and sensitive issues. You also need definitely not to try any identity theft or deception or dishonest behavior. And they are also hot on inappropriate content for children. So any incendiary or demeaning content or even spam or misinformation will get blocked. And they certainly are very careful when people offer medical, psychiatric, or veterinary advice when it contradicts authoritative sources. Links to YouTube channels are allowed, but external links will probably end up being held in the queue. And out of the 8 comments that were deleted, 2 were from viewers who were banned from our channel. and the remaining six sent an email, but unfortunately, no comment appeared. Meanwhile, I've written back to those people, and obviously, there's an issue which they are aware of. Um, there is a YouTube level moderation and a channel level moderation. And the YouTube level moderation is much tighter and obviously has hit around 5% of the viewers who participated in the test. And the other thing that's interesting is YouTube holds comments for about an hour before they're made public while running its algorithms and checking on any suspicious comments. And we get to see them in YouTube Studio around an hour after real time. And then they get about another hour before they get publicly. So you can see your own comments immediately, but the public view of everyone else runs around 2 hours behind real time. So in this test, we had to wait sometimes 6, 7, or 8 hours before finally being able to match up an email with a comment.
Very interesting. So let's get on with the rat, Richard. AJ Tony 1313. Thank you for your excellent daily presentations, intellectual, factual, and enjoyable to watch. Thanks, Tony. Or thanks, AJ, I should say. To be sure that I understand your overall crash of Flight 171 hypothesis, please allow me to summarize your analysis. For some unknown reason, both engines failed just after liftoff. The captain quickly reacted and decided to be proactive and quickly toggle off then back on the fuel supply switches. He did this to ensure that the computer would be triggered to restart the engines. He waited 10 seconds to return the fuel supply to the on position to ensure that the rat would be available to restart both engines. The captain's quick thinking resulted in both engines relighting, but the low altitude prevented him from saving the plane. Some thoughts and questions based on the above scenario. The co-pilot's question was likely asking, why did you cut off the engines? The captain's correct answer, I did not. First question would be, the captain easily saw an alert that the rat was deployed on his instrument panel. Your hypothesis is that water ingress may have initiated the engine failure. Question is there any way that the investigating team would be able to confirm or deny this as a possible cause? I watch every episode. Keep up the good work, gentlemen. Richard.
Yeah, well, that's a great summary, and thank you for that, AJ. When the rat deploys automatically, there is an ICAS message, elec rat auto deploy, and there's also a caution light that lights up. As far as your second point, the maintenance logs will contain what work was done, if any, in respect of the AD 2016-1404 on water leaks and drip shields and water sealing, and whether the Boeing service bulletins on drip shields and couplings were then fixed in the maintenance cycle. And the FTR data will have the timing and sequence of all the events in detail. And we have been given the timing of the movement of the fuel switches from run to cutoff and then later back to run. But we have not been given the timing of the rat deployment initiation. And we've also not been given the timing of each engine starting to lose power and the timing of each engine going below idle speed. And similarly, the timing of the loss of AC power from each engine has not been given. In the absence of the maintenance logs and the FTR data, water ingress remains a plausible hypothesis. perhaps even a probable cause, but we can't prove it beyond all doubt.
Tony MD 56 Richard says, thank you to both of you for all the hard work that you've been putting into your investigation. I would point out a couple of things that you may not have considered. The 787 QRH memory items for dual engine failures are fuel control switches both, cut off then run, ram air turbine switch, push and hold for 1 second. There is a lot of talk about the delay in some of the actions of the pilots without actually knowing what alarms and indications they were receiving and when. For example, if one of the engines failed momentarily before the other, the ICAS may have initially indicated a single engine failure, leading the pilots to start the memory items and non-normal checklist for that, before then getting an indication of a second engine failure. If one of the pilots had started going through the procedures for a single engine failure, and this was followed by a loss of screens as a second failure occurred, that may have prompted a question, why did you cut off? I know you have discussed the ANA uncommanded shutdown in 2019 because it was a different engines and thus TCMA. However, if this was caused by a weight on wheels error, would this shutdown have also happened with a Gen X 1B70 engine? I look forward to future episodes of your excellent analysis. Richard, over to you.
Yeah, well, the Boeing 787 sequence of actions depends on whether there is a single or dual engine failure, as you say, Tony. You make a good point that a single engine inoperative on takeoff is an event pilots are trained to handle. And if the initial indication was one engine inoperative, the pilots would start the memory items and the non-normal checklists for that. We are not told exactly when the second engine failed, and we don't know the time gap between the first and the second engine failure, but it can't be too long. As you point out, the pilot may very, very well have been busy with a single engine failure when they were suddenly presented with a dual engine failure. And the second item you mentioned in the dual engine failure QRH is a precautionary item and is only required if the RAT did not deploy automatically, as it should on a dual engine failure. And all we are told in the preliminary report is the aircraft achieved the maximum recorded airspeed of 180 knots IAS at about 08:08:42 UTC. And immediately thereafter, the engine 1 and engine 2 fuel cutoff switches transitioned from run to cutoff, and with a time gap of around 1 second. The aircraft air-ground sensors transitioned to air mode consistent with liftoff at 08:08:39 UTC. So the WOW sensors were working according to the preliminary report. The preliminary report does give us the time that the aircraft started to roll at 08:07:37 UTC. And we also know the first ADS-B data point once airborne at 08:08:46.551 UTC. The distance between these 2 points is 2,851.142 meters, and the time it took was 69.551 seconds. This allows us to reconstruct the takeoff roll and the initial climb, and we've separated it out in a screenshot we're showing in 3 phases. The first phase is the start of the roll and the stabilization of the engines. And then the second phase is the roll on the runway itself at takeoff thrust. That lasts for 53 seconds. And then there's the first 11.551 seconds of the initial climb. The speed at which the ADS-B data point has reached, the first data point, is 172 knots ground speed or 178 knots indicated airspeed, which sort of ties up with the maximum speed of 180 they got from the FDR. My figures are based on the reported headwind of 6 knots, so the wind might have gusted another couple of knots more. The data in the preliminary report, however, does not align with the ADS-B data from Flight Radar 24, and several analysts have pointed this out. They say the maximum speed of 180 knots is incorrect. But actually, when you go into it, the reported V1, VR, and Vmax all do not quite match the ADS-B data. So I don't know what's going on there with the preliminary report.
Well, as we've pointed out many times, the preliminary report is while 15 pages long, is riddled with inconsistencies and omissions. So yeah. Lockheed Central. This whole hypothesis rests on the inference that the RAT deployment was triggered before the switches moved. That inference is based on the assumption that the RAT deployment to generating power takes 10 seconds. Everything else is based on this assumption, i.e., it is a rationalization of it. Given the significance of this assumption, isn't it worth reviewing its robustness? My understanding is that 10 seconds is the maximum deployment time permitted by the FAA, and that the actual deployment time could be lower, perhaps 5 to 6 seconds or even less. If the RAT did deploy in 5 or 6 seconds, then its deployment could have been automatically triggered by both fuel switches being moved. I can't pretend to be able to validate actual deployment times, but scientists and engineers usually quote ranges rather than a single value in order to indicate the uncertainty variability in a figure. And we have not seen that here, just a single figure quoted. Isn't it worth a deep dive to investigate this? I think we've done that, Richard, haven't we?
Yeah, we did a deep dive in episode 181 back on the 9th of August. And Collins Aerospace, the RAT manufacturer, does not actually publish the timings from deployment to power, hydraulic power, and then electrical power on its public product information. Obviously, they communicate it to Boeing, but it's not publicly available. However, multiple independent aviation experts and technical analysts on the Boeing 787 emergency power sequence consistently quote approximately 6 seconds to hydraulic power and 10 seconds to stable electric power following RAT deployment. And those figures are plus or minus 1 second. So I don't think it's going to reduce from 10 down to 5 or 6 seconds, but it might reduce from down to 9 seconds, or maybe go up to 11. We make 3 key observations. Number one, the inability to stow the landing gear, and that normally takes place when positive rate of climb is achieved, and that is 2 to 3 seconds after takeoff. And the second thing is the RAT hydraulic pump, noted in the preliminary report as starting at 08:47, and that's 8 seconds after takeoff. And the third thing we note is the hard cutoff of the transponder sending ADS-B data, which occurred 11.67 seconds after takeoff. So we know from the preliminary report The aircraft air-ground sensors transitioned to air mode consistent with liftoff at 08:08:39. The airport CCTV also shows takeoff at 08:08:39.201 UTC. We know for sure the landing gear was not retracted, and that requires hydraulics in order to be able to retract. And as I said, that normally takes place 2 to 3 seconds after takeoff, but it didn't happen. And the preliminary report confirms that the RAT hydraulic pump began supplying hydraulic power at 08:08:47, 8 seconds after takeoff. And then we had the hard stop, which is an electrical failure with the ADS-B data, or it might be not a failure per se, it's the transponder being taken offline because it is not considered an essential electrical system when there's an emergency happening. And we know that there was a hard stop 11.67 seconds after takeoff. When you put all of this together, and together with the fact the pilots would have known that the RAT was deployed and that the RAT only supplies limited hydraulics to the flight control surfaces and not to the landing gear. And we know the landing gear lever was found still in the down position, not the up position. And this implies that the RAT was deployed before a positive rate of climb was observed, immediately after takeoff, and before the pilots wanted to raise the landing gear. And this is consistent with a RAT deployment at 1.67 seconds plus or minus 0.33 seconds after takeoff. And the RAT takes around 6 seconds to provide hydraulic power, that fits, and around 10 seconds to spin up fully and achieve a stable electrical supply, and that fits. So we're not just reliant on the RAT, we are reliant on several observations and an analysis of the timeline right from takeoff through RAT deployment, through the landing gear not being retracted, until we get the hard stop on the ADS-B data. So there's more to it than meets the eye. We know for a fact that both engines shut down, but we also know they were successfully relit, so there was no engine damage. The preliminary report says the fuel quality was checked and found to be satisfactory. So that only leaves an electrical issue which caused the dual engine shutdown and the RAT deployment.
Yeah. Now, Fayaz Ahmed 1281. Richard, thanks for your mind-boggling work on the search for causes of AI 171 crash. My question is, do you expect an interim report in November from AAIB India, just like Jeju airline crash?
Well, in the case of the Jeju Boeing 737 crash on the 29th of December 2024, the preliminary report was published on the 27th of January 2025, and an interim report was published on the 19th of July 2025, although a press conference was cancelled. In the case of Air India 787 crash on the 12th of June, it is possible, but not certain, that an interim report might be released after 6 months, because there is a huge public interest in this crash. And under the ICAO Annex 13, there is, however, a mandate that the preliminary report is issued after 30 days and a final report after 12 months. And if the final report is not ready after 12 months, then India must publish an interim statement on each anniversary of the accident, outlining the progress they've made in the investigation and any safety issues they find. There's no rule that an interim report must appear after, say, 6 months. And in the past, India has only done what is mandatory and not what is optional. So, for example, on the Air India Express crash of a Boeing 737 back in the 7th of August 2020, where there were 21 fatalities, or again with the Alliance Air Patna Boeing 737 crash with 158 fatalities back in 2010. In both cases, there was no interim report. There was just the usual first initial report after 30 days and then a final one after 12 months.
Yeah. Paul Pretorius, Whiskey 9 Quebec. Maintenance technicians must be licensed to perform procedures on an aircraft type, airframes, engines, electrical, avionics, etc. It is obvious that the maintenance procedures were not followed and directives were not passed down or performed, which leads me to believe that the problems arose because maintenance was either not performed or shoddy workmanship prevailed. Clearly, lack of maintenance. It's a big call.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting point, Paul. And that's why we need the maintenance logs to prove what was done and what was not done. What we do know and have pointed out already that there are several Air India Boeing 787s currently missing from active service. VT, ANM, ANG, ANH are all parked in Mumbai, and ANN parked in Delhi. And we know that ANE, ANA, and ANT are all in MRO facilities in different locations around the world. And we also know that TSQ had its lease terminated and is no longer with Air India.
Berks County Farmhouse. We've heard from him or her before. Howdy, love the channel. One thing I don't understand is, did water moisture enter the APU battery containment first and how, and then start the thermal runaway, or was the thermal runaway first and that compromised the containment letting the water moisture in? Did electrical shorts in the aft EE bay due to water moisture start the thermal runaway? Enjoying the 737 series and can't wait for November for both MH370 and Amelia Earhart. Oh, that's a big call.
Yeah.
Richard, over to you.
I didn't know we had Amelia Earhart planned in November, but there you go.
There you go.
The smoke from the APU battery containment housing vent is a clue that there was an APU battery issue. The container is a steel casing, and we've even shown a picture of it in a previous episode. And it is designed to withstand a lithium-ion battery thermal runaway, an explosion, and fire. If this container is compromised, and only if it is compromised, then water can enter. And the mixture of water with the lithium ion will produce HF in both gas and liquid form. And that is a pretty caustic and nasty contaminant. So water ingress into the EE bay can cause an electrical problem that in turn can cause the dual engine shutdown. But the battery issue is a separate issue to the shutdown issue of the engines. And the lithium-ion APU battery issue actually came before the engine shutdown, but the two issues are not directly related in the causal chain of events. So they may have become related in the aftermath and the consequential problems. So we have to take it carefully, one step at a time.
Yeah, indeed. So, Richard, that's all we've got time for today. So, thank you very much indeed for answering those very interesting questions from the viewers on the rat, and also, of course, conducting that test on those folks who believe their comments are being deleted. I think we've kind of solved that problem. There's a couple of reasons for all of that. So, thank you again, Richard.
You're very welcome.
And viewers, we're going to be back tomorrow looking at the This is the second part of our 737 MAX coverage, a second part of 6 episodes. And we're going to be looking at the FAA certification of the MAX and how that evolved over many years. I think you'll find it very, very interesting and possibly somewhat surprising. But we won't tell you too much, but it's going to be a very interesting episode. So thank you for subscribing to us. Thank you for viewing. Thank you for liking us. Please keep those wonderful comments coming. Please keep those great questions coming. And do please join our community and support responsible journalism. And we look forward to your company tomorrow. Thank you.